To build great products, you need to have balls. No offense. Product managers are really good to iterate on very specific problems, finding a solution, comparing other tools in the market, finding what's great, etc., etc. Where they're not good, think outside of the box and innovate.
Guillaume Moubeche is the founder and CEO of Lempire. He has taken the company from zero to a $200 million plus valuation with over $28 million in ARR. Today, we're going to break down how.
I have not seen really like a product manager coming up with an idea from like a customer and explaining it in a super sharp way, saying like they're complaining about X, Y, and Z, but I think the problem is that problem, and I think we can solve it in that way. No one is doing it in the market. Let's go there. Sometimes I just felt like you're writing specs, but is this really helpful? Me with my vision, and I spend time with a good UX or drawing stuff on a paperboard, it will be sometimes more efficient than having someone who was going to write like 10 pages of specs where the devs are going to kill themselves because one, it's not clear. The reality is it's very difficult to find people who can communicate super clearly in the day-to-day, and product manager should be able to write very, very clear and very, very concise documents. And the concise part is extremely important.
The story of Lempire starts with Guillaume, and so it's so exciting to have him here with us today. You've probably seen him on social media. We were talking off camera that I probably see him in my social media feed 6 to 7 times a day. The man is prolific, and he's built a 27 million ARR company on top of that. So Guillaume, thank you so much for making some time and being here today.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I'm happy to share anything that can be helpful.
Awesome. So some people may not know the story, but I've been religiously following the story. And in 2018, you kind of took a leap of faith. You invested all $1,000 you had into Lemlist. And I know that part of that was because you had developed a lead generation agency in the past. But can you tell us more? There are a lot of founders, a lot of product managers listening. How did you have the conviction to build Lemlist? What gave you that, this is what I should be working on?
It's basically like I run a lead generation agency where I generated a bit of money, and then I tried to launch like a first software that really didn't work out, and the idea was trying to be like super innovative, come up with something that had never been built in the past, etc. So I spent all my money, and I had like just $1,000 left, and then I was like, okay, like back to basic. What was I doing when I was running this lead gen agency? And what were the things I was struggling with, or my clients were struggling with. And I realized that the promise, of email automation or cold outbound in general was like, hey, put your sales on autopilot. But the reality was very different. So you had to personalize your emails. You had to make sure that the deliverability was great. You had to make sure like tons of things need to actually be done in the background. And none of the tools were actually taking care of it. They were taking care of basic follow-ups, but personalization was very weak. And there were no knowledge at all about what is deliverability and the importance of, all the technical stuff. So I just thought, what, like this seems for me like a big enough topic that at least I master, and at least, I was the target for the target audience for this kind of product. So I was like, let's try to launch like an MVP with just $1,000 and see like how it goes. And eventually we started like getting customers, getting traction, and today we're pretty successful.
That's awesome. So there's this story from the early days that you've told in a couple interviews that you rebuilt the entire UX, and there were some lessons along the way about not communicating with users. Let's less focus on that. But what gave you conviction again in those changes? Because you talk a little bit about how your product sense led you down that path, because I think it's really crazy to see some of the metrics: free to trial, paid conversion, 3x. Activation rate 4x. So can you talk us through how there are a lot of PMs listening who they can't move activation rate? It's been stuck. How do you do that?
The thing is, I think like at the time I was really like confused by how many people would sign up and not activate. And activation rate for us at the time was whether or not, when they create an account on Lemlist, whether or not they launch a sales prospecting campaign. So I was like, why the fuck would people create an account on Lemlist, like spend time typing their email and so on, and not launch a campaign? And I was like, it must be like the workflow that's totally like unintuitive. And the way that we had built it initially was really like for scale, I would say, meaning that I assumed that people by essence were organized, meaning that you would prepare your list, prepare your campaigns, and then eventually when your sequence and all your emails would be ready, you would try to put them all together, A/B test everything, have a master plan, etc. So the reality is like the tool was built in the way I would like organize campaigns for agencies and things like that, just so it's easier to scale. But people did not think like this at all. So everyone was confused. I tried to like record like a few demos of people like showing me how, you know, like they were going like through the different phase. I also, at the time I was using Hotjar just to see like live sessions and things like that. And during this time you realize that if your product is not like super simple, it will not work out. So I was like, okay, how can I make things in a way that people have no other option than to move through the next steps? Because right now it was not really like a dedicated onboarding where you have like different steps to follow. It was very much of, okay, like you need to launch a campaign, but we let you like discover the product a bit on your own. So we totally like created a much more advanced funnel where the only step that you could take was the next step. And by doing this, everything changed. So I think it was the month we had the highest churn on Lemlist. So at first it was very scary because I remember, you know, we had a community and people started to say like, I'm not sure who the fuck told the guys at Lemlist to change this, but this is the worst idea ever. Like the stupid motherfucker product manager. And you know, like people thought we were a big company, but it was just me. So I was, you know, I was like a support guy, product guy, business guy. and then, you know, I would just like listen to like all the feedback. And then I realized that people were really frustrated because we actually like removed some part of the product, like they couldn't find their templates anymore, etc. But it was just like lots of quick bugs to fix just because of the change of the whole interface. So during that frustration time, like people decided to churn because they were like really angry, and I understood. But the month after, and the only thing I was looking at is like what's the new cohort doing. And as you mentioned, like the number were just like insane. And I think at the time, like I think it was like 4x on our activation, or 3x. I don't know. I don't remember. But essentially, like I remember that we were after that around like 35% activation rate. And that number, I think we were never really like able to reach it. And that's obviously because at the time, the quality of the leads that were entering the funnel were also like a lot higher than right now, because, you know, like when you get bigger, I think like the dream for any company would be to attract organically the exact target that you want to convert. But in reality, you always have like a bit of outliers that will reduce, you know, the conversion rate. But what you want to know is like, on my target audience, is my conversion rate like the highest possible, and measure your cohorts in that way.
Love it. So many insights in there. But we got to move forward. So one of the interesting growth channels that you guys had, especially at the beginning, was AppSumo. And I think there's this really cool story where you went in person with one of my friends who I've had dinner with very often, Ayman Al-Abdullah. And so can you tell me a little bit more about, you know, the AppSumo channel for a startup founder? And then you mentioned that you learned a lot from him in that session. So what did you guys like precisely work on?
Yeah, so the AppSumo is essentially like a place where you can sell lifetime subscription about like on your software. So it's a bit like tricky because obviously you're gonna have to have users that are gonna stay lifetime. But at the same time, because we were like bootstrap, it was like just a good way to generate revenue. So I think in like 2 weeks we made $175,000 or something like that, maybe like $170,000. So that was like really cool and just like a good way, to launch a product. But the most important thing was having all the feedback and be able to create a community from it. So it was a very competitive market, and if you want to enter fast a competitive market, it's good to have like a strong user base that's going to continuously like give you like feedback, etc. So I just felt like, yeah, it's definitely like the right way to go. Even though afterwards, over time you realize that as your company grow and you have to maintain, like features for users who are not paying on a monthly basis and your product is evolving, it creates like still a lot of headaches, and there are a lot of things like that are tough to handle sometimes. But we've always tried, like our best to deliver on everything that we promised. And the second part with Ayman, which I think like is really like an underrated CEO, to be honest, because he grew like AppSumo from like 2 to 3 million to like 80 million in revenue, and then gave like the assist to Noah, like for the big slam dunk. But in my opinion, is the one really like who created like the whole team. And I think like I love the way Ayman operated like the whole business. He was very conscious about the people who he was hiring, the way he was doing things, and the way he was creating like an exceptional team and coaching his team to accomplish greatness. And for me, like I've learned things on the day-to-day with him. And the first thing, like one of the biggest takeaway I had when I was in the US, because they flew me in Austin. I had like not a lot of money at the time, so they flew me in, they paid like for everything. And they spent a week essentially like working with me on different channels. Like they had like a videographer like to record my whole like trip in Austin. And then I asked them like, hey, do you think I could just like leverage a video guy to record video for me? Because back then I was just recording with an iPhone, and they're like, yeah, sure. So then, like they asked me, like, hey, we can potentially like do this with like a script. It would be much better. So they taught me like you can use a script to record video, etc., etc. So it was really, really good, and they were like super helpful. And Ayman eventually like when he asked me, I remember asking me like, hey, what's your goal for like end of the year, or like end of next year? I think like in 18 months. And then I say, yeah, in 18 months, like I would love to be at like 1 million in annual recurring revenue. And then he looked at me and it's like, why not 10? And then I was like, it's a good question. And we laughed, and then I was like, yeah, I mean, I'd be happy with 10. But eventually, yeah, I mean, the question was deep, because it was like, then he asked me, okay, like we laughed obviously about it, because I think it's funny. Yeah, like the 10x always, it's you can take this infinitely, but the reasoning that was quite interesting. It's like, okay, we spent a bit of time, and it's like, let's imagine a company where you're doing like 10 million in annual recurring revenue. What does it look like from a lead perspective, a traffic perspective, a conversion rate perspective, a team perspective? And it forced me to be like a lot more forward thinking about the future. And I feel like it was a key driver for me to be a lot more ambitious. He was believing in me before anyone else was, because, in France, like we had the vast majority of our customers in the US, but in France, like the mindset for entrepreneurs, like people would look at me and they would be like, why is he speaking in English? He has a French accent. Like they would like mock my English, etc., etc. While in the US, like the mindset was like, yeah, I mean, you want to build like the greatest sales automation platform ever created, just go for it. And just having someone like believing in me, I think was huge in the early days, and it gave me like enough confidence and strength to pursue like the mission. And yeah, I'm grateful for that.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about your story, and honestly, I could probably do like a 90-minute interview just on Lempire's story. But what are you up to these days? Because we see you preparing for a triathlon. We see Lempire's product presence expanding greatly, the team expanding greatly. I think you're up to like 90 people now. You have COO Charles, who we interviewed also for this piece. So where is your focus these days?
It's a good question. My role has been like tremendously like changing in the last 12 months. So I built a very strong C-level team. The goal was, I would say that until 22 million, I think, in annual recurring revenue, I was really like the only one handling like most of the departments, etc. And then I hired like Charles, our like chief operating officer, then our chief of staff, etc., etc. And the team built a lot and grew a lot in seniority. So the idea was for me like to stop being involved too much in the day to day and be able to focus a lot more, on the strategic vision, on the strategic topics, and also on the top of funnel, because the reality is like in the last 6.5 years, I built like a very like strong following, and I think like the audience I built keeps growing, and my goal is by having like a very like wide and broad audience is to be able to be able to just drive awareness to Lempire, to attract the most talented people. So, if someone we're struggling to hire at a certain like role, I would potentially like do the outreach myself, do the interview myself, etc. Like be part of the process. If it's a matter of like M&A, so like merger and acquisition, acquiring like other companies, because obviously like right now we are like at I think 27 million in annual recurring revenue. We're gonna do $10 million in EBITDA this year, so we have quite like a good leverage to acquire like other companies, and to do so, like having a good deal flow is super important, and I receive like a lot of potential deals, but it takes time, to evaluate everything. But that's kind of like my role now, and if I can and whenever I can, obviously like help like the team on very like specific topics, because I still like having my hand in the dirt. But it's tough because when you've been doing everything like for a long time, it's really tough to kind of like let go, and it's a transition period that I'm currently facing at the moment, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the challenge, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm facing the same problem at a much smaller scale as I go from solopreneur to having people on my team. It's like, oh my God, I would edit it differently. I would write it differently. I completely resonate with that. So I think there are basically two phases of product development we want to focus on. In the first phase, can we kind of briefly summarize to that 22 million ARR phase where you were really doing most of the stuff? How did you guys prioritize what to build? So
there is like I would say like the scientific approach to it, which is, obviously for every feature that we want to create, you define like one, something called business impact, and two, technical difficulties. So you have like basically two lines. Business impact is from 1 to 5, 5 being like the highest impact, and technical difficulties from 1 to 5, 5 being extremely difficult. So whenever you have like all your features and you list impact and difficulty, you can basically try to map out, you're going to do the one that have like the highest impact from a business perspective with the lowest time to develop. And at the same time, you try to kind of like build up the foundational features. So that's kind of like the way I would say like very like scientifically approach way that we used for many years. But, and there is a big but, there is also like stuff that were just more opportunistic, where sometimes it's a matter of like how big is my gut feeling on a certain topic, and do we want to go there or not? And like we were the first sales automation platform to talk about like deliverability and build like features around that. No one had done it in the past. It was something like totally like new. It came from a community member, Vibav Cincinnati, who was like basically like sharing his problems. And then I started to see like people wanted to be together to do manual stuff, to warm up their email. And I was like, okay, like we can do something better and automate it. And eventually like it took off. Like sometimes, you know, it's, I think that's the key part that is very difficult for a product manager in general, is to have like a strong conviction and a conviction on the market that is, I mean, what I see, you know, like on the day to day, because for me, you know, it's been very difficult at first to really see like the impact of product managers, and I was always being very like challenging with the product managers, because I was like, sometimes I just felt like, you're writing specs, but is this really helpful? Like me with my vision, and I spend time with like a good UX or drawing stuff on a paperboard. It will be sometimes more efficient than having someone who was gonna write like fucking like 10 pages of specs where the devs are gonna kill themselves because one, it's not clear. Like it's the reality is like it's very difficult to find people who can communicate super clearly in the day to day, and product manager should be able to write very, very clear and very, very concise documents. And the concise part is extremely important. And people, whenever they don't master things, they will write like Notion docs that are like 5 pages long. So of course, you know, you can, it feels like it is high quality, but for me, it's horseshit. Like literally, like I'm so like, this is a kind of thing that I think makes me, like, just talking about it, it makes me angry, you know, like, but eventually over time, you know, like, you realize that, of course, like the best product manager, they are like really good at understanding a specific problem. They dig deep into all the issues that a feature can bring. And as your product is growing, obviously, like the complexity increase, and you also need to have very good specs for developers, so you actually save time, because development time will increase as your product gets more and more complex. And eventually, like, you want developers to be able to just focus on the code and not too much on trying to understand what product are trying to say here. So I would say like this is the biggest change was, you know, in the me spending time, you know, like either on the drawing board or with like UX, UI, and just like getting and bringing like customers into calls to explain, you know, like the problems and going through the problem, understanding it, versus like the struggle is like, I think to build great products, you need to have balls. No offense, but it's like you need to make bold decisions. And one of the biggest issue, it's like, and I see it all the time, is when you talk to users. If you are like empathetic, you want to solve their problem. So they're going to tell you, for example, like, hey, yeah, like my struggle is I can't find new leads, or it takes me too much time to find high quality leads, or like to find the emails of high quality leads. So typically, like you have two ways of solving this problem. Problem one, you say, maybe like they're not using the right data provider, so we're gonna integrate a waterfall and do like tons of things, which is something we've developed. Or solution two, it's like, what is the actual problem? Like, is it really like the data, or is it that you're not booking enough meetings and hence you are not like meeting your sales quota? And in that case, the problem needs to be reframed, because maybe the reason why, you know, like you can't find leads, etc., is because like the meeting rate is not good enough for you, and maybe there are other things to look at. And this is something that very few product manager, I think, can have an impact on, because it's very tied also to the vision and the direction in which you want your product to go. So I feel like I I have not seen yet, I think, and maybe I would be wrong, but I have not seen really like a product manager coming up with an idea from like a customer and explaining it in like a super sharp way, saying like they're complaining about X, Y, and Z, but I think the problem is that problem, and I think we can solve it in that way. No one is doing it in the market. Let's go there. I think product managers are really good to iterate on very specific problems, finding a solution, comparing other tools in the market, finding what's great, etc., where they're not good to really like think outside of the box and innovate, etc. And then, it depends on what you need. And as your company scale, do you really need product manager to innovate and drive like all these things? I don't think so. I think that can come from, vision management,
Compared to the founder, every product manager just really pales in comparison. They hadn't started the lead generation agency that we started with. They haven't done the customer support, product guy, marketing guy, ops guy phase that you had in your career. So that's why I think it's so remarkable how much you have delegated over time. In the way product functions at Lempire today, how do you strike that balance of where do you come in and give input on vision? How close do you get to the actual features being built these days?
So right now, I would say I'm spending time with my COO, who handles all the different teams. So the way it works, it's usually I would let everyone do whatever they have to do. So I don't want to have be the guy who stop a launch just because things are I'd rather ship fast and iterate. But what I would do is when something is shipped, I would potentially go back, try to test it, and then record Loom videos to the team. And then, I would just give my feedback, essentially to Charles, with COO. And then he will work with the team. But the reality is on the strategy, we spent a lot of time, Charles and I. Charles has also a really strong strategic vision. And from the strategy afterwards, I would say that we split into two categories. The iteration part, you take a problem from some of our customers and then you try to iterate on a solution, or you build a solution and then you want to iterate to activate the amount of users who are actually using that feature that we've pushed. And then we have more the gut feeling and big bet that we make, and this category, I think, over time is something that we're trying to push a little bit more. But in the organization that we're doing and that we are going to push soon, there will be more different squads, and that way people can work in smaller teams and be a lot more autonomous, which is something that is always a struggle when you get too big.
Awesome. Well, as I said at the beginning, we could probably do 2-3 hours on this. These were the most important topics. I think we learned a whole ton. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if you have any other question, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.